this morning that Robert is with us. I've known Robert very well now for, I think, 12 years, ever since we arrived in Todos, Santos. He was one of the first people to befriend me and to welcome my work here. And over these years, we have continued to have an ongoing conversation between two friends. A conversation that has at times been very inspiring to me, and at other times perplexing, and sometimes frustrating, because we have really mixed it up, like a couple of sophomores in college, over the big questions in life. Sometimes I've thought Robert and I are anomalies, maybe even beings from another planet, because our interests and our concerns are very much the same, very, very coinciding, and seem to revolve around an endless and voracious curiosity about life. What is it that's happening here? Who are we? What are we doing? What's true? Always looking for what is really true. Trying to sift through the usual deceptions and misapprehensions and mistaken beliefs that are taught to all of us in the course of our lives. Sift through them to find something that we can both rest in profound agreement. I think we have sought agreement over the years. And we come from very different backgrounds. We're totally different, two different people, which we will probably reveal, but not probably, inevitably. And we came together, I think, a year and a half ago or so, something like that, here for a discussion, similar to the one today, and enjoyed it so much, and others did too, that we decided to give it a go again. We'd like to share with you in an open way how we are exploring philosophically, experientially, being here as human beings, and how we have never arrived at any definite conclusions about anything except that we don't know. And with that kind of introduction, the theme that we chose jointly for today was, what are you really seeking? And I have given that some thought since we decided that, and have realized again and again, I really am not seeking anymore anything. There was a time in my life when I did seek, and as I look back on that, what I was seeking was a way to escape my life, and discovered that that was fruitless, and that what I'm doing instead of seeking is like constantly acknowledging day by day, moment by moment, what it is that's here, with as little judgment and opinion as possible. So the answer to the theme for me has been, what are you really seeking? Nothing. Nothing. But that has been very liberating for me, and I know for you. And so it's your turn now to speak.
I have nothing to say. say it's been great knowing Robert all these years. Before he showed up here, I pretty much felt that I was possibly the only person in Todos Santos who was thinking about these things very much at all. Of course, the community has grown a lot since then, and a lot of people, it was 20 years ago that Catania and I showed up here and started living here. But, and in those days, it was pretty much people who liked to surf and not think about anything very deeply except the next wave, which actually is not a bad way to live. Be happy with that. But then Robert and I met and hit it off very well, and began to meet once a week with an intentional agenda. Remember those days?
Yes, I do very well. I used to leave those meetings thinking, that's the last one, I'm not coming back.
Because in those days, we really were bumping heads quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the basis for that bumping of heads was that Robert, as you know, is a Buddhist priest. Yes?
Yes, but
Complain.
a lay
He's okay. He's a lay Buddhist priest.
but I'm not a Buddhist.
I'm not doing it.
You hear that? I'm not a Buddhist.
Okay. But in those days, maybe you were a Buddhist.
Yes, more.
Okay. So, and I came at this whole thing from quite different directions. So the two of us were seemingly on opposite sides of a mountain, but the same interest. But as our discussions deepened, we began to realize that we were really very, very close together. And that's where we are now. I don't think there's much that Robert and I really disagree on at all. I think I'm in the same place that Robert just revealed about himself, which is that I used to have a kind of agenda of wanting to discover meaning, and that seems to have left along the way, so that simply just being here is sufficient.
Would you say something about how that discovery happened? How that change happened for you? I know it was fairly sudden, actually.
Well, this happened back in the 1980s.
Yes.
We really want to be historical? No.
No.
Well, I will. I had a big dream in the 80s. Well, at that time, I had a mentor I was working with who was, I suppose you could call him a spiritual teacher, although he would have not called himself that. And we'd been doing a lot of very intensive work. He was a very difficult man who was always kind of humiliating me and asking me, "Are you sure you really want this?" And I would always say, "Yes, I really do."
My teacher did that too,
Okay.
that humiliation thing.
Well, you know, we have a lot of bullshit imposed upon us, and it kind of sticks to us, and you might need, you know, some high-pressure hose.
And if you don't get it from a mentor, you'll get it from life.
Yes. Well, one night I had a dream, unlike any other dream I have ever had, before or since. I found myself in a boat rowing on a sea, and the sky and the sea were the same color, so that there was no horizon. It was like being inside a sphere of gray. And I was rowing and had this feeling that I needed to look behind me. And I looked around like this, and there I saw this cliff, this headland, with a huge structure on it, like an old hotel with hundreds of rooms. And this building was moldering away. It was just falling apart and kind of dissolving into the landscape. The only thing that was keeping it together was this system of buttresses with boards and pillars and all this. And I could tell that that support system had to be constantly maintained. This is a very powerful visual. I mean, I just saw this in a second. And in that second, I realized that that was the ego. And that I was sailing away from it. I had no need to maintain that anymore. It was falling apart anyway, and just no reason to work on it. Just let it be what it is. Well, I woke up just astounded. And Katanya was doing something else. She went to town to do something. When she came back, she found me sitting on the kitchen floor naked, laughing. And this went on for several days, an altered state kind of thing, trying to make sense of this, I guess. So that was the first thing. And there was a period of adjustment to that, but I finally did kind of learn to live with it. And then several years later, I fell ill with a very difficult illness, which was not ever really diagnosed, and I was in pain and delirium, fevers and nightmares and all this for about a year and a half. And up until that time, I had read spiritual books and things like that, but when that illness ended, I just had no more desire. I realized that it was okay to just live, and if I could wake up in the morning and be okay, that was great. That was great. So I think that's the end of my seeking. Happened, I would say, in 1989 and 1990.
For me, it happened more gradually. There were a number of experiences, mostly related to meditation retreats, long periods of silence and sitting, where I had gradations of experiencing what's, I guess, cosmic oneness, or no separation, self or other. And then the most recent for me was a few years ago here, when there was so much falling away of that bullshit stuff that I thought I'd had a stroke. And actually went through a medical and neurological examination for a while to determine if something terrible had happened in my nervous system. And whatever happened was not something terrible actually, but it certainly was life-altering. And I think both of us, we came together with the understanding that what we had always assumed in our early lives, both of us were creative and accomplished people when we met. We came together with the understanding that what we had discovered was really that everything had not meant much at all that we had accomplished. And we came together, as I recall, our common attitude was, well, now what? What is this about? How should we live this way now?
Yeah.
I recognized that spaciousness in you and resonated in me. And over the years, I've seen that we talk about the same thing. And it always comes back to, we don't really know the meaning of God, what's beyond all of this individual self. We don't really know what anything is, actually. And so, how is that to not know? Can we be there?
Yeah, well, I never think about God. I would not think about that. I'm not interested in thinking about anything that is speculative at all. I must say that. Now, we may have a little difference.
Well, I'm more bhakti. I'm a more devotional type than you.
So, well, you can have an image of devotion to, say, the life force, or humanity, or nature. So that's fine.
That's what I speak about.
Okay. But I think you and I may agree on this. When you have grown up in a religious culture, and whether your own home was religious or not really isn't the point, because this is everywhere. You walk down a city street and there's crosses, for example, on the buildings. What does that mean? What does it actually mean to put a cross on the top of a building? What could that possibly mean? This is a special building. This one gets the cross, and the one next to it, that's where people have sex and all that, but not here. Yeah? So I think these ideas have been poured into our brains when we were children. And they make us think that there's something else that we have to attain. We have to become holier or more religious, or make a place for ourselves in the afterlife. Yes, this kind of thing. I never think about it at all, I must tell you. If someone brings that up, I won't get in their face about it. I mean, everyone has a right to believe what they want. We have to be tolerant, whatever that means.
It usually means being quiet and going on.
But I think that, we're talking about what are you seeking? And Robert says, well, the two of us have kind of come to a point of not seeking anything. In order to not be seeking, I think you have to realize that the only thing that there is this right now. There's not, there may be a future, although in each one of our lives the point will come where someone tells you you don't really have much of a future. You better get your affairs in order, yes? Which is actually what the Buddha taught. That's the base, that's the ground floor, my friends. And so if we can be with that, then we can kind of turn down the volume at least on what I may attain, where I'm headed. And I'm someone who's been seriously ill and wasn't really expected to live. And so for me, sitting here now, breathing freely with a bunch of nice people in the room, this is heaven. I'm very serious. And there's nothing more that I would... It's funny, right? It's wonderful. And so there's really nothing more that I would be looking for. And so I think if each of us would take a moment to look within ourselves as we sit here and simply ask ourselves, what's wrong with this? What is really wrong with this? If there isn't anything wrong with it, you're there. See, this is true nature. If there is something wrong with it, then that has to be addressed. If you're carrying some hatred in your heart, or you are worried about something that you can change, then by all means. But to imagine that there's this attainment somewhere in the future, and I think this is what you and I really agree on.
Yeah.
There isn't. The future never comes. It never comes. Right now is the only truth. The rest of it is a fantasy. It's a story that we tell ourselves. There's something greater. I'll be in heaven with Jesus, or I will become a perfect master, or whatever it is. That's all the bullshit. And what we really have, if we're honest, is this. There isn't anything else that I know. And so when people speculate, what about reincarnation? I just go, oh, please. That's just the story we tell ourselves. You heard it from someone. You read it somewhere, or some teacher told you, and you believed it. You wouldn't do that in your personal life. If someone tells you, you can buy this bridge, here's the deal.
It's just this, okay? That's an interesting phrase. And this is a fascinating word. It's just this. But this means something different to each individual person. That this is uniquely somebody being here in this. Huh?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
the more that I've explored this, as a psychiatrist and a therapist and a Dharma teacher, blah, blah, and being Robert, I discovered that although this is different for everyone, somehow it's all the same, really. If you look past the individual history and what it is that we each cling to, if you look past that, all of us are doing the clinging. And we're all of us looking at this moment from the same perspective of really not knowing. So it's different and it's the same at the same time. It's like this is everything and nothing also at the same time. Often when people hear that phrase, it's just this. I've heard, well, that's a lot of gobbledygook. And what does that mean really? It's our common experience, what this is. And if we get together like we do on Sundays to notice this, it's quite amazing that there's a sharing that happens that goes beyond the ego boundaries. You can feel it, it's in the air. Touch it.
Well, that's the awareness that we all share.
There you go.
There's an awareness that we all share. I've discussed this with you, but I'll,
Here we go.
yeah. No, Robert knows. I'm the quiet type, but if you wind me up. So watch it.
That's why I invited you today. I love it when you wind up.
If I give you a glass of water and you take a sip, you don't have to ask yourself if it's warm or cold. You know right away. You don't have to try to know if it's warm or cold. You don't ask yourself. As soon as you taste it, you say, no, it's warm, or you say, that knowing without trying, that's instantaneous. It doesn't involve anyone trying to find anything, it just happens. That's naked awareness. And we all share that. That is the root level of being human. All of us in this room are in exactly the same boat with that. Exactly. This is our common humanity. It's not just human. I share this with my donkeys. If there are flies and mosquitoes around, they know it and so do I. I don't ask myself, are there mosquitoes? And the donkeys are doing the same thing. See, this is awareness. This is awareness. What Robert was referring to when he said it's different for everyone is what fills that awareness. What we entertain with our awareness differs from person to person. We each have a preferred story and a preferred...
And how we respond to it.
Yes, how we respond.
What the response, what the attitude is.
We'll say more about that.
Well, I think that determines really the quality of our lives. We share the same experience, and at some point the same awareness about here-ness, being here. But we each respond to it in a conditioned way, depending on what's happened in childhood, and, parents in the schoolyard and all of that. We all have our unique ways of responding to what it is we experience. And that, you could call that personality, the individual small self. We each have our own way of doing that. I think that the quotes, spiritual practice, the spiritual life, is realizing that those individual ways of responding are limiting, actually. They're a limitation. That awareness is much wider than we can imagine from that point of view. And then once that is known, then curiosity comes, a voracious appetite to explore awareness. And at least that's been my experience. So I'm always dancing on that edge of individuality, commonality, sameness, union, ego beyond ego. I think life occurs for us in that channel, that division, until at some point, I think maybe it's age or maybe it's experience in whatever, I don't know. At some point, the life in the separate self is less and less interesting, falls away. No more, I mean, it's just, okay, we know that story.
Well, that's what I was thinking when you were speaking a moment ago, that I'm not really that interested in the content of awareness.
No, you're not.
At all, really. I simply enjoy being aware, and including pain, suffering, bad thoughts, all of it. That just, the less that we try to choose and decide what we like and don't like, or what we approve of or don't approve of, the easier it is to just reside in the pure awareness, the way a child sees, the way a very young, a baby, if you watch the baby's eyes, it's just taking in the world. And it's possible for us to really be a lot more like that. If we give up always weighing and measuring, always thinking I don't have this and I want it, or gee, that looks good, I want more of it, we can just be the eye that allows everything to occur.
It's kind of a regression, isn't it?
Yeah.
You get dumber.
Yeah, I think it's stupid.
It's a going back to the basics. I call it the basics.
So why is this important? Well, I think it's important to at least entertain this idea because if we go back to Buddhism, life is filled with suffering. Let's be honest. It's very, very difficult to really live a human life. There are many challenges. There's pain and suffering on the physical level. There are worries and anxieties. There's fear of not being at all and what that would be like to be ill and dying. There's wanting love and not being able to find it. There are disappointments from our children if we have them, or their attitudes towards us, the disapproval if that happens. All of this just comes in. And we can either struggle against that, try to correct it, but that's like this building that I was telling you about. You can work on that forever, and you'll always be working on that.
I was thinking when you were saying that about the cross, you use that analogy. I believe that cross is a symbol of suffering, really, human suffering. That the 4 points of the cross are the elements, earth, air, fire, water. And it's a symbol of human incarnation and suffering. And not something transcendent at all, but the reality of life on earth that the Buddha spoke about. And that somehow the realization of that and a surrender to that suffering is liberating rather than finding some way out of it.
Yeah, you speak about surrender a lot.
I do.
And I understand that.
I divide it, however. I think of surrender as grace, really. But that what comes before surrender is acceptance. That's really what I'm speaking of when I say that word. Acceptance of how it is. And that's profound. I mean, it's, as you said, it's very difficult, this life, and to accept how difficult it is not easy, really. impermanence is a
Yeah.
horror.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, my way is a little different from yours, I think. Maybe it isn't. This awareness that I was mentioning, to me, is like a movie screen. It's empty. It's always empty. And it will be filled by whatever movie is projected onto it. And the movie is always changing. When you sat here, when we sat here for half an hour or whatever, silently, we become aware that thoughts arise. They just arise on their own. No one's making them. And they change. That's the movie. The screen is the awareness, which tastes the water and knows if it's warm or cold right away without having to ask
Hear
yourself.
sound.
So my way is not the surrendering to the suffering and accepting it. It's simply to become aware of what I call my true being, or my real nature, which is the awareness and not the movie. See, it's what's always there is the screen. When the projector shuts down, the screen is still there. And I say that what we are really is the screen.
See, I see a middle ground in there that before one realizes one is awareness, that's what we are.
Yes.
There's a step of, and I call it acceptance, which is looking at it, experiencing it, and I think of that in terms of impermanence in that way. I mean, impermanence is so terrifying. It's so absolutely the truth that nothing lasts and everything we love we lose. To get a hold of that kind of acceptance is the step to the awareness that you're speaking of, that level of awareness.
Right. Well, you're a teacher, so you look for stepping stones.
I do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And I'm not that kind of a teacher. I'm not any kind of a teacher. So
Well, I disagree with that.
well, I don't.
You teach in a different way. Your presence on the internet is huge right now. These days. Your venue is different, perhaps.
Well, my experience is not a step by step. Robert coaxed that story out of me, although I'm bored with it. But
I did insist that you tell it.
yeah. But the key in that story is that Robert didn't do anything. I mean, this shit just happened. I didn't make my dream. The dream arrived, and I didn't make my illness. No one would have wished for what I went through. It was hard. It was really hard suffering. A year and a half of it, painful. No one would ever wish for that. No one would. And yet, in retrospect, that's pretty good. A year and a half of suffering. Some people suffer for 20 or 30 years to wake up. So that wasn't really so bad. And so I never have the feeling that I did anything or attained anything. And I don't see how I could make someone else do that.
See, I think my path to that understanding was through a period of time of still thinking I was doing something. I don't really find that true anymore either. But the way to that was, I think, much more gradual.
Well, see, that's what I've learned from you in the past 12 years. When you and I met, I was in this kind of radical condition, if you remember it, when I just said, oh, this Buddhism and everything's a bunch of shit.
Yeah, well, we got into a few arguments about that. Buddhism is a bunch of shit. Well, I had to react to that. And I'm a Dharma teacher. But I came to see exactly what you meant and realized that I also believed that.
That's right.
I wouldn't say bunch of shit, but I would say just another philosophy.
Well, you're a very cultured person.
I don't know.
But
I'm a better bullshitter, maybe. That's
one of the things I really love about Robert is that he
My mom taught me that.
But so what I learned from you in the last 12 years is I had my experience and I'm grateful for it, but it's not transferable. And so if you actually do want to influence someone else or help someone else at all, which, you know, both of us have been mental health workers and we did want to try to help people who are suffering.
Yes.
Then maybe it is good to have a step-by-step to some extent. And because...
Well, I found for most people that that's needed.
Well, there you go.
That your awakening was one of those rare ones, I believe. I also know other people that experienced that.
I do too.
For me, it was different. It was slower.
So it really doesn't matter, does it?
No, it doesn't. And who knows, actually, how it all happens. I totally agree with you when you say that there's nobody behind this. Nobody creating the thoughts, no one having the experience, no one doing anything. No one owns it, no one created it, no one belongs to it. I have no question about that.
Yeah, me too. And we're just kind of surfing the waves, you know, there isn't any doer
Yes,
behind this.
yes.
Which is, you know, you and I both feel this way about religion.
So how is this happening? Yeah.
It's automatic.
You open your mouth and words come out.
Exactly. You know, you mentioned the internet. When I write, I've got a...
This is good.
I've got a web page and also a Facebook page. And over the years, I have gotten into a lot of interesting conversations, typing, with people from all around the world. I find it fascinating. And also, since I am a bit of a loner, it's easier for me to sit and type than it is to hang out at the pub. So, one of the things that I have realized is that when I write, no one's doing it. I don't decide what to write, I just type. The words come and they get typed. And the only time that Robert actually has a hand in it is proofreading. Honestly, later I'll just find the typos.
Okay, now, we've spoken about this before.
Yeah.
And I say to him, I don't know how you do what you do, all that writing on the... And he says, I don't know how you do
what you do.
You do either. Because the experience is different. I come in here and sit down on a Sunday morning and start talking. I don't know where that comes from. Afterwards, I hear the recording and I think, who said all that? I didn't know who said that. It's a saying. There's this not doing, and yet everything happens.
So this is when we don't reside in self-judgment. We're not always giving ourselves a grade. I just think it's more that's freer for that to flow. We don't have to be censoring ourselves all the time and sitting in judgment. And I know as a child, I was trained to sit in judgment on myself. I mean, probably many of us.
All of us.
Yeah. I was seriously, I mean, my family was upwardly mobile and very anxious for me to, they came from Europe, they're immigrants and all this, they're very eager for me to, you know, and so I was always being taught, don't do it that way, do it this way, don't say it that. And so I had this presence all the time. That's gone. It's not there. Thank God.
Really.
Yeah.
Really. I was thinking maybe at this point people would like to comment or ask questions. How do you feel about that? I don't know what else we could say really, just more of the same. Let's open it up. Is that okay?
Okay.
Anyone, please, feel free.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you both for your presence. Really find this very beneficial. My take for myself on the question of seeking is that there are a couple of prerequisites that I would have to say that I'm seeking nothing. One is an economic comfort level, that I don't have those concerns. And the second is in a previous life, in my work life, I couldn't reach a point of not seeking anything. I was so goal-oriented, but now I'm free of that because I'm retired. And I just wanted to see if you would react to the prerequisites that I presume for myself.
I relate very closely to what you're saying. I was my father's extension in life. From my first breath, I was to be a doctor because he always wanted to be a doctor. So my seeking always was, in the beginning, to please him, to do well, grades, go through medical school, accomplish, just to please him. And then after that, to please something in me that needed to be recognized and to have success. So seeking went on a long, long time, just as you described. And it was suffering, actually, in many ways, and a struggle. And yet, I think necessary. I can't imagine how it would have been without all of that. Can you?
No, it's true.
There's a hierarchy of needs, and I think we have to recognize that. If you put a plastic bag over my head, I'm not going to want to be talking about this stuff. I'm going to want to breathe. If we sit here for several hours talking about this, I may really want a drink of water. I'm not more than listening to myself talk.
You might want to.
So etc. So there's a hierarchy. The first need is to breathe. We need that once a minute. Then we have to have water every day. Food at least every third or fourth day, otherwise you soon perish. If we get all those things, steady supply, then you have to have a warm place to sleep, a roof over your head, safety from violence, these things. Then we have sexuality begins to, if we get all these things, and then we have more social needs, to have friendship, to have relationships. All of those things, we seek that automatically. That's just our primate nature. That's our animal nature. There's nothing. That's when I think about the end of seeking, I don't mean the end of seeking those things. I mean the end of seeking some other state than the natural state that we're all in right now. See, in spiritual teaching, and I'm a dissident on spiritual teaching. That's the idea. In spiritual teaching, there is an assumption that all of us are not in the ultimate state or the natural state. There's this other state, and I'll sit here on the cushion for 35 years or whatever it is, and then I'll attain it. Or I give up sex and only eat vegan food, and then I'll attain it. That is the kind of seeking that I'm talking about. I maintain that each and every one of us in this room right now is in the natural state. There isn't any other state. This is it. It doesn't get any better than this. If you don't see that, it's because you have the story that was put in there about heaven or the enlightenment masters or whatever the story may be. And then it's as simple as that. So if you are seeking economic security, mazel tov. I hope you attain that if that's what you need. If someone else is seeking a girlfriend, I hope you get that because it's great. That's not the kind of seeking that I'm referring to. I'm only referring to the seeking of some other feeling than you have right now. Some other good myself.
Yeah. More questions?
Donna, can you speak up, please?
Oh, yeah, I've got a room place. So, when you use the word seeking, it's like you've purged yourself, you've exercised yourself from that state, and that in this conversation seems like it's a higher state. And I think that the gentleman who idea of it being developmental cycles. In other words, you seek to attain something in your work, or say Robert started Spirit Rock, or you have different goals or purposes. And somehow the conversation is wrapped around that seeking is like impatient. Like if you're seeking, you're impatient about something that you don't have, or you haven't attained, and that it's more desirable to not reach or seek. And collaging that up against, I'm actually attracted to people who have that sort of energy of attainment, or that sense of reaching, drawing yourself into content that seems mysterious, that you're interested in having a better relationship with. So I'm not sure what the question is, but is seeking or reaching for something equivalent to being impatient, and that's stressful, and you want to try it? Because both of you have said, I'm done with that. I'm done with that. So what is the difference in your experience of the point in time that you did feel like you were reaching, and now? What is the difference in your experience?
I'd like to respond to that, Donna. The phenomenon of seeking, the psychological yearning, really looking for something, already implies at the outset that one is not okay, that there is something to get, that the present is not sufficient. We need to improve it or change it. We're seeking to, as Robert said, get out of our experience in some way. That is the delusion, and what the Buddha called wrong view, that begins the whole path of human suffering, really, is the realization that oh, this is not okay, I need to do something else. To discover that realization is really not truth, that now is all there is, and heaven is here, is what we're speaking about, really.
So you become more patient with it. So you become more patient with it.
Much more patient.
Okay.
You agree?
No. I'm not too sure about the word patience. You can't become patient. You are what you are in this moment. If you have a feeling, I don't like what's going on here, I want it to be different, that's now. See, this is a very tricky ground, and this is the whole problem with this kind of conversation at all. Robert and I have to spend a lot of time tuning this in. We finally, I think, got that. This is not a question of changing anything or being different. It's a question of seeing the futility of trying to change anything.
And that's an experience, not a thought.
Yes, it's not a thought.
Something you experience.
Yes.
Futility of that.
Yes. What is in this moment. What is in this moment. And it can't be any different. How can this moment be any different? It can't. Let me just finish the sentence. Yes, by the time, if I want to make this moment different by exerting some force, and then the next moment is different, it's not this moment anymore. This moment was about exerting the force, not having it be different. Yeah, it's complicated. Yeah.
Father, I've been sort of hearing something that I'm also feeling from both of these people. That if we stopped seeking, or if our ancestors had stopped seeking, if historically everyone had just gotten comfortable and didn't have this impatience, didn't have this desire to find something to learn and to achieve and to push us forward as a civilization, we might still be living in caves. So isn't there something good about this energy that makes us impatient, that makes us try to create, that sends us out looking for answers to our human problems as well as our spiritual problems? I mean, it sounds sometimes like say, oh, just stop, just be comfortable and content, and won't that in some way sort of keep us from achieving a higher level of civilization and humanity, and perhaps helping more people in the world? Well, I'll stop. But I feel
Yeah, well, this is the same question, really. It depends on what you mean by seeking. See, I think that what Robert and I are talking about is not what you may want to do in life. All of us have a different destiny in life. Some people are highly motivated to do something. I don't think that necessarily stops because you learn to appreciate the moment as it is. I think it actually deepens that, and it makes it focus it cleans it up in a very good way. So, in other words, I'm not recommending everyone sit in a cave and stare at your neighbor, or we all move to India and just drop out or something. That's not the idea. The idea is to realize that you may be dead next minute. Your heart could stop right now. So enjoy this moment. It's as simple as that. You know, just be here. And then whatever you're doing, if you're striving hard to do something, see yourself striving and enjoy that. If you're running a marathon, say, boy, I'm a good runner, whatever it is, you see. Even though in other words, the idea of the marathon is not to get to the finish line. The idea is to run. When you dance, you don't try to get from one place on the floor to the other side of the room. That may happen, but you're really dancing. And so what Robert and I are talking about is dancing with life as it occurs, not being passive. This is not about passivity.
Absolutely agree on that.
Thank you.
I think there are more questions, and I'm curious about what they are going to be.
Let's speak up.
Do we not have to appreciate our own perfection? I mean, you just said that we're perfect. We just get in our own way.
I didn't hear that.
It's about appreciating your own perfection, acknowledging that you're perfect. Give it to Robert.
No, it is. When the time comes, and when there's an opening of the mind and the heart at the level of that we're speaking about, it's beyond appreciation of oneself. It's way beyond that. Even appreciation of oneself implies separation between oneself and what one's appreciating. What we're speaking of is absolutely no separation between self and any state of mind. It isn't a state of mind. It's a total experience that I really believe is our heritage, that it's everyone's destination eventually. I believe that. That's personal belief. But it's appreciation and loving oneself comes before what we're speaking about. When you already love yourself, now your path begins. When you're happy, now it really happens that you're working hard. If you understand what I'm saying, happiness is difficult in itself.
I understand your question because this is one that I've been asked to reply to a lot. I'm very worried about that idea, although I understand the love behind it, and I agree with that part of it. Is the guy who shot all those kids in Massachusetts perfect? I don't know. It's a question. So it sounds like a judgment. I would prefer to say I am what I am and not hang any value judgment on it at all. I can't help being this way. There's no one doing it. You see, I don't have a little homunculus in my head making these words. These words are me. Whether they're perfect or not, I can't. Who would judge that? Yeah. That makes sense.
No, but it does.
On the question of words.
And what?
The question of words. You just said the
Words.
words. There's such a paradox here that, like you are talking that your way is to speak with words.
Yes.
And yours is to write with words.
Yes.
And the paradox being that it's also the words that keep us from the awareness.
Amen.
So how have you found a way to...
I started painting. I've abandoned words as much as possible as some kind of expression of what I experience in life.
And yet it's still the way we can share with each
Yeah.
other about our experience, which is a place of no words.
Yes. Isn't that difficult or wonderful? I don't know. It's mysterious. Words do get in the way, and yet they are our way. The other way that has occurred to me is to listen not to words but to sound. Painting and listening to sound. Not only the sounds of the world and nature, but the inner sound inside the head. It's an ancient path of coming to terms with what we're speaking about. So for me, listening has been important. Not the words, but the sound.
And then like the path of the master, as Kierkegaard saying, it's the
That's the same,
path
yes.
of light and sound.
It's an old path. Surat Chap Yoga, the Sufis write about it all the time, did. And I found it very helpful as a way of being with words. Words are a very coarse and inadequate expression of that sound.
I had one other thing, if I could. I was just very struck this morning, especially when you said Mazel Tov. I was just reminded about the Torah teachings and the rabbis who would spend years debating Torah stories. They call them midrash, what's your story about the story, and what's your story about the story. And somehow I wonder if it's a gender thing. It's all you guys for centuries having conversations about all these ideas.
Yes, well. I don't want to go anywhere near that.
I'll address that. I've got this Facebook group that I started called Awaken to True Nature, and it's an invitation only. It's got about 250 members. Any member can invite people. So there are a number of women, and they participate, I would say, equally in the conversation. So it's not really, you don't have to be filled with testosterone. but the rabbi thing, because I was born into a Jewish family, although I don't feel Jewish at all. That is what happens when there's a received book. Then everyone argues about what the book means. And I think that it's best to not have a holy book of any kind, or even in Buddhism, you see people are now arguing about what the Buddha meant, what did he say, what did it mean. I think that's really a waste of time. I think it's so simple to simply just be yourself. It's so simple. I'm not saying that it's easy. That's the difference. It's not easy. But all these interpretations really don't mean anything. And I use words, but I use the words to try to subvert these conversations, not to add fuel to the fire. That's not to keep it going, but to just say.
One of the things I admire about and inspired by your way is the way you use words